When you start a romance novel, you know how it's going to end. You know that the main couple will end up together, that they will get their happily ever after. That's the promise that a romance writer makes to the reader. And in order to fit that genre, they have to keep that promise. That is the fun of reading romance novels for a lot of people. But the fun of interactive fiction is about not knowing what will happen. The promise that an IF author makes to the reader is that they will be able to make a difference in the story. The amount of difference varies, but the fact of difference exists. So when we set out to create Heart's Choice, the all-romance spin-off label of Choice of Games, we were faced with this tension. We needed to keep both promises, happily ever after, and your choices control the story. So today I'd like to talk about how we navigate that tension and some of the techniques that we use to reconcile those competing requirements, specifically multiple goals, multiple romanceable characters. We call these characters ROs, romance options. You'll hear me using that abbreviation a lot. Choices to express emotion and affirmative consent. These techniques allow us to keep both promises, the promise of real choice that affects the story, and the promise of a guaranteed happily ever after. And these choices also enhance the interactive experience by deepening the emotional connection fostered by interactivity. I'll be focusing mostly on the narrative effects of choices, but I will be going through some general principles of ChoiceScript along the way and showing a few examples of code because the mechanics do matter here. Also, before I start, I should mention the examples in this talk include some depictions of intense romantic moments, some mentions of sex, no depictions of sex, nothing explicit. It's rated about PG-13, but if you have small children in the room with you, this may not be the talk for them. So, first, I'd like to outline a few things about Heart's Choice's general game design. If you're not familiar with Choice of Games or Heart's Choice, here's what it looks like on the screen. And this is an example from my own game, Sci-Hi. You see there's a page of setup, a choice, and some options for how to deal with the situation. In this scene, you're a high school student. Your best friend is being wrongly accused of having stolen another student's phone, but you know that this other kid, Will, is really the culprit. So how do you react? Do you grab him? Do you talk to the principal? Or do you come up with a clever plan? All right, so there is an example of ChoiceScript. Yes? Yes, all right. And here is the code. So you can see the choice, the options, and the variables. So those variables are how we manage the branching narrative. If every option introduced a new story branch, we would very soon multiply into infinite complexity. There are so many choices over the course of a ChoiceScript game that we just cannot have a new branch point for every single choice. So we manage this complexity in two ways. First, there is an hourglass narrative structure. We have small branches going out and then back in to a central point. Second, we have what we call delayed branching using those variables that we see. So back to that example choice, you have your three options. You could grab Will, you could step in and start talking, or you can have a clever plan. If you grab him physically, athletics goes up. If you have a clever plan, academics goes up. Instead of recording each outcome of each option, the code records the type of option that you have chosen. It stores those results cumulatively in those numerical stats. Later on, those stats get tested, and the result of those tests takes into account the cumulative effect of all of the choices that you have made before. So let's take a look at how that works. This is an example from later in the game where you are trying to impress the head of the stage crew so that she will let you help out with the drama club play. And you have some options for how to impress her. One of those uses that athletics that you had before. You can say, I'll impress her with my strength. So if you do, you try to pick up a really heavy crate. If you have made enough athletics-oriented choices earlier in the game, you will succeed at this test. That will in turn create a larger branch in the story. You get onto the stage crew and the story progresses in one direction. If you fail, you don't. Another wider branch opens up and goes in a different direction. And what makes these choices meaningful along the way is this possibility of failure. You don't know how it's going to turn out. There could be very dramatic differences in how these choices turn out, depending on what you have done before. Your choices really do have a large effect on the story. So bringing us back around to where we started, this chance of failure is what ensures that you don't know how the story is going to end and ensures that your choices do make a difference. But how do you use this? How do you use this difference with the guaranteed happily ever after? So one of the techniques that we use in Heart's Choice games to balance the tension between the guaranteed happily ever after and the uncertainty of choice is the use of multiple goals. This is a design element that Heart's Choice shares with Choice of Games. Every game has multiple competing goals. The PC is always trying to do multiple things in the course of the game. And in Heart's Choice, the happily ever after is the one and only goal whose outcome is predetermined. Whichever RO you choose, that's the one you end up with. Here's an example from Pirate's Pleasure by Lisa Fox. I'm going to be using a lot of examples from this game as we go forward. Whichever of these people you want to end up with, that's the one you get. You can choose Caleb, Nathaniel, or Alexander. And there's no example of the code because there's really nothing more interesting in the code to see. You choose it, and that's who you end up with. There is no stat test to determine whether you succeed at getting the lover you want. There is no stat test to determine whether he approaches you. But every Heart's Choice game has other goals besides the romance plot. And in just about every other one of those goals, you can fail. The outcomes are determined by stat tests. And here are a couple examples showing how that works. And there are several reasons why you might not be able to succeed at everything. Sometimes your success isn't guaranteed because different goals require different skills. You can't specialize in every skill at once. The top example from If It Please the Court by D.E. Chaudron is a good example of that. In this game, you are a spy at the court of Versailles in the 18th century, and you may have several different skills. Are your skills better suited to wooing the people, or are they better suited to winning the support of foreign nobles? The same skills won't apply to both situations. You can't achieve both of those goals based on the skills that you are able to acquire in the course of the game. Another reason why you can't achieve all goals is that sometimes those goals are narratively opposed in each other, in themselves. And for that, we have another example from A Pirate's Pleasure. Your crew can love you or fear you, but not both. You have a rival whom you can try to fight, befriend, or undermine, but not all three at the same time. And as before, whether you succeed in any of these goals depends on whether you have raised the relevant stat high enough to pass the test. And in fact, it is possible to succeed at almost nothing. Here's how that plays out in Pirate's Pleasure using those example stats that we just saw. You can, in fact, totally lose at everything on this example stat screen. You can try to defeat your rival, but you fail. Mott gets the better of you. The attack sends you sprawling to the ground. You crumple in a pile, painfully defeated. And what's more, you have failed at making your crew fear you and love you. I'm taking your crew with me, he says. They won't follow you anymore. So you have failed in everything on the screen that you have tried to do. But when you make your defeated way back to camp, the person whom you have chosen to spend the rest of your life with is still there for you. You have succeeded in getting your happily ever after, even if you have succeeded in nothing else. Even though you have to flee because your crew has abandoned you, Nate, whom you've chosen here, says, "We're leaving, off to find better shores. I'm ready to travel the world with you." So every game has multiple goals besides the romance. You choose which ones you want to focus on, and your choices determine, either directly or indirectly, which ones you succeed in achieving based on the numerical variables that are set and tested throughout the game. And now, even though the ending of the romance is predetermined, there is room to exercise choice during the romance, and that's where I'm going to be focusing for the rest of the talk. And the first way this happens, as we've seen, is by choosing which person you want to have the romance with. Every Heart's Choice game has multiple ROs, each with a distinct personality, backstory, and plot arc. So here are some examples from another game, A Player's Heart by Melissa Scott, to illustrate how dramatic these differences can be. In this game, you play an actress in an all-woman theatrical troupe in a sort of steampunk setting. And here are the descriptions of 3 of the potential lovers. These don't all appear on the screen at the same time in the game. I just sort of put them all together for illustrative purposes. So each of the potential lovers has a different personality and a different trope that signals to the reader what the relationship is going to be like. Mur is friends to lovers. Celine is rivals to lovers. Joscelyn is a rich patron. And the emotional experience of being with each of these partners is entirely different. So your choice of who you are in love with will shape the rest of the story accordingly. Now, sometimes you can choose among different tropes and backstories within the same person. Here's an example from a game that is not yet released. It's still a work in progress, Forbidden Magic by Frances Pauly. It's an urban fantasy romance. And here, you're reconnecting with someone who you haven't seen in a long time. He's one of the potential love interests, and you get to choose what kind of relationship you had with him in the past. And that, in turn, influences the arc of your story in the future. So is this a second chance romance? Are you reconnecting with an ex? If so, are you the one who needs to make amends, or is he? Is this rivals to lovers? Is it friends to lovers? You get to choose the emotional dynamic that you want to play, and that will color the rest of the story going forward. Sometimes you can customize the RO even further. In some games, you get to choose the gender of the ROs. Side note, in every Choice of Games title, you can choose the gender of the PC. Sometimes you can choose the genders of the ROs. In Heart's Choice, there's a mix. Some games have fixed gender PCs and fixed gender ROs, and in some, the player can choose the genders of the PC and all of the ROs. So other ways that we allow the player to exercise choice within the context of the romance is in expressing their character's emotions. So being able to choose emotions on this granular level, moment by moment, allows the player to connect with their character more strongly, to feel more immersed in the story. Here's another example from Brimstone Manor by Frances Pauly. It's a paranormal gothic romance. You play a nanny, and in the house owned by your sexy demon boss, there is, of course, a spooky room in the basement where you are not allowed to go. When your boss tells you this, you get to choose how you react. You can be suspicious. You can be trusting. You can put on a show of bravado. You can be charming, trying to butter up your boss no matter what. And how you react says a lot about your character. Mechanically, choices like this set personality stats. Narratively, they let the player customize their character and feel like they're really in control of what their character does. Obviously, we can't do this 100% of the time. If every other choice were how do you feel, it would get really repetitive. But at major choice points, at majorly dramatic moments, at moments of heightened emotion, we offer these choices. We never want our players to get to a major emotional moment and say, that's not how I feel, or there's nothing I want to do. We want to offer them that choice to allow them to immerse themselves more deeply into the story. So when we get into the context of the relationship narrative, that space for emotional expression is even more important. Here's an example from Jazz Age by Nicola White. The PC has just been flirted with by a really handsome man, and their reaction says a lot about what kind of person their character is. It's the author's job to give a wide enough range of potential reactions to accommodate many different kinds of characters. And that brings us to the question of consent. Whenever there's a choice related to attraction, romance, physical expression of romance or attraction, or sex, we must offer a choice to the player. We never want to take away the player's option to say no. We always need to offer them the choice to say yes. Now, when it comes to attraction in particular, this means the author has to thread a very tricky descriptive needle. On the one hand, as you've seen, they're writing in the second person. They are always inside the PC's perspective, but they can't narrate what the PC feels. But they will need to show why the PC might find each of the ROs appealing. So they need to show that the ROs are attractive without showing that the PC is attracted. And there are several ways to do this. One is with strategic physical descriptions. Here's a description of one of the potential lovers from Pirate's Pleasure. This is Captain Nathaniel Black, Nate, the guy who our poor loser PC ended up with earlier. So the player is the one who decides what they're attracted to. But you can see, but the author shows the kind of vivid description and physical intensity that you would get in a romance novel to signal that this is one of the potential romances. It describes the way his clothes fit on his body, mentions the brightness of his smile, shows how his personality shows through in his mannerisms and his appearance. So the author is signaling that there is the potential for attraction here, but they don't narrate that the PC is attracted. They don't narrate how the PC feels. Another way to leave open the potential for attraction while honoring consent is, again, to offer a choice. Here we are back in A Player's Heart, where we saw the examples of those 3 potential women that the PC could be interested in earlier. The PC is an actress, and they're having a sword training session with their fellow actor Celine, and it has just turned very intense. So the player gets to choose how they feel about it. They can say, "This is glorious, I want more." They can say, "I like it, I want to take it a little further." They can say, "I don't like it at all." Or they can say, "I don't know what I want. I'm going to wait till later to figure that out." If they decide that they don't like it and don't want more, if you choose that top option, then it ends here. This is what you see. The PC steps back, pulling away from Celine, saying, "I'm done." And she agrees. After this point, there won't be any more flirtations with Celine. The code records that the player isn't interested. Conversely, if they choose the option that says, "I want more," only then do you get more. The language becomes more intense in the description of the physical sensations and the emotions. It mentions her scent, talks about the intimacy of the swordplay. It builds on the attraction that the player has already declared. In both cases, the player sees only the content with the emotions that they have chosen, and that emotion colors future descriptions and interactions with that character. So the player always gets to choose how they feel, how their emotional arc progresses, and they especially get to choose whether or not to be attracted to each of the lovers. Now, the most important way that we use choices for affirmative consent is in romantic and sexual scenes. We always give players a chance to say yes or no to romantic and sexual actions, whether it's offering the PC a choice about what kind of actions they initiate, or by offering a choice about how they respond to an RO's offer. Here's a scene from Dawnfall by Rowana Silver, which is a sci-fi game. This is a scene from near the end of the game. You've already committed to a relationship with Gwen, one of the other people on your spaceship, and you've finally been able to get a moment alone with her. And here's what she asks. "Now, what do you wish of me?" And you have an option, and you have a choice of what you want to do. You can hold her, you can kiss her, you can sleep with her, you can talk to her. So within the context of a committed relationship, you get to choose exactly how much or how little you want to do physically and exactly how close you want to get emotionally. And whatever you choose, Gwen goes along with it. If you choose the I want to hold you option, here's what happens. It has its own kind of emotional intimacy. It's about holding her close, allowing her to be the one protected. If you choose the I want to talk option, it's about feeling that you're so easy to talk to, which is something special in her world. So there are narrative differences, but there's no greater or lesser value placed on any of these actions. In the code, there are no decreases in the relationship stats for choosing the less physical options. Again, I'm not showing the code because there's nothing to show, except for the narrative differences that you see here. Whatever you choose to do, the RO will go along with that, will honor your consent, will never ask you to do something other than what you have chosen. Here's another example of how that works. This is another forthcoming game. This is Heart of Battle by Faye Eichen, which is due to be released in a few weeks. I believe the release date is August 18th. And in this, the PC is a gladiator. This is a scene from the end of the game. And I chose this scene in particular because it shows an example of reinforcing consent. Here, you've gotten together with Petra, the healer, and the way this romance progresses through the game, you can commit to Petra relatively early. And if you do, there's a scene where you can sleep with them if you choose to. So this is from later, after, a couple chapters after you have slept with Petra for the first time. And Petra asks again, could we do it again tonight? And again, you get to agree or not. Whichever you choose, Petra goes along with it, does not ask you to change your mind. Consent is not a one-time only thing. It is renewed with every encounter. This careful attention to consent not only allows the player to shape the story in the way that they want, but allows them a sense of emotional security. They will never be told that their character does something that they themselves do not want to do. They will never be pushed into more intense romantic play than they want. So they don't have to spend emotional energy on that feeling of worry or caution, which means they can direct it all towards the positive immersion that they want to give to those scenes. Through all of those techniques, the incorporation of choices adds to the emotional intensity of the romance plots of Heart's Choice games. You have the suspense of not knowing whether you'll achieve your other goals, the triumph of success in achieving a goal where there are real stakes to your success or failure, the depth of connection with your character that comes from getting to decide how they feel, and the intimacy of being able to express yourself in romance and sex scenes in exactly the way you want and never in a way that you don't want. And of course, no matter what, you will always get a happily ever after. Thank you.